You saw the headlines. Orcas ramming yachts off Spain, a rudder torn off, a boat sunk, a viral video with a whale nudging fiberglass like it meant something personal, and you probably filed it under revenge. Here's the problem. The marine biologists actually tracking these specific animals in the Strait of Gibraltar and along the Portuguese coast have quietly moved on from that story. The evidence points somewhere much stranger. One sinking has the clearest physical record. One witness will surprise you. One hypothesis just got quietly discarded, and one reframe changes what the word attack even means out here. Late spring 2023, off the coast of Portugal, a sailing yacht, mid-40s in length, crew of 3, calm seas. What happened next was documented well enough that marine surveyors could reconstruct it after the boat was already on the bottom. A pod of orcas approached. They oriented on the rudder. They didn't circle the hull, didn't push at the bow, didn't come near the crew. They worked the rudder like a target, pushing, biting, applying force from below and behind until the fiberglass began to give. The crew radioed for help. A Coast Guard vessel arrived, transferred the people, and watched the yacht settle stern first into the Atlantic. That's the sanitized version. What I want you to notice is what didn't happen. Nobody was bitten. Nobody was rammed in the water after the boat sank. The animals didn't chase the Coast Guard vessel. Once the rudder was gone and the yacht was disabled, the orcas lost interest and moved on. If this was an attack in any sense the word usually implies, that ending doesn't make sense. Hold that in your head because it's going to matter. Now, the witness question. You've probably seen sailor forums, YouTube compilations, and news segments treating every rudder failure in Iberian waters as another orca strike. Some of them are. Many are not. The reason this story broke out of the tabloid category is that the credible witnesses were unusually credible. Delivery skippers with 20,000 miles under them. Charter captains who've worked the same corridor for a decade. Working marine biologists on research vessels who watched the animals do it in daylight and photographed the whole thing. Consider a witness in that position, a delivery captain moving a boat from Vigo south to Cadiz, running the night watch, calm sea, nothing on radar. He feels the wheel go loose in his hands. First assumption, the rudder post failed. Second assumption, he hit something in the water. He calls it in, gets towed, and only later, when 3 other boats in the same week report the same failure at almost the same coordinates, does the mechanical story stop working? That's the shape of the credible cases, not I saw a monster. It's I thought my boat broke, and then I found out every boat on this stretch of coast is breaking the same way. Here's the part the news coverage skipped. The animals doing this are not anonymous. They have file numbers in a research database. Photo identification of killer whales is a mature field, and the Iberian subpopulation has been individually tracked for years. Researchers know which animals are involved, roughly how many, and which family lines they belong to. This was never a cryptid case. It was a known population doing something new, which brings me to the female you've probably heard about. Public reporting nicknamed her White Gladys. The story that circulated said she'd been struck by a boat, possibly injured, possibly entangled, and that the rudder behavior started with her, a trauma response that then spread through the pod as a kind of learned grudge. It's a clean story. It has a villain and a victim and a reason. And it wasn't stupid to believe it. Killer whales are documented across multiple populations to hold long memories, coordinate strategy, and pass information down social lines. If any marine mammal was going to hold a grudge, it would be this one. So the hypothesis had a real basis in what we know about the species. But it stopped fitting the data. Here's what I mean. As more photo ID matches came in, the profile of the animals doing the interacting shifted. It wasn't a wounded matriarch leading vengeful adults. It was juveniles and subadults, over and over, with adults occasionally participating and sometimes just watching from a distance. The behavior wasn't spreading the way a trauma response spreads. It was spreading the way a game spreads through a schoolyard. Younger animals were the drivers. Older animals were, more or less, chaperones. That doesn't match revenge. That matches play. And once researchers stopped forcing the revenge frame, the picture opened up. Killer whales have a documented history of behavioral fads. The famous example is a group in Puget Sound in the late 1980s who spent a summer swimming around with dead salmon balanced on their heads. Not one animal, a whole pod, for weeks. Then they stopped, and nobody ever saw it again. It wasn't hunting, it wasn't feeding. It was a fashion, a trend, a cetacean version of a viral dance. If you sit with that for a second, the Iberian rudder behavior stops looking mysterious. It starts looking exactly like what a small, socially tight, highly intelligent, culturally rich group of animals does when it invents a new game and teaches the game to its young. But you're allowed to ask why now? Why did it start in 2020 and not 15 years earlier? Which brings us to the prey base. The Iberian killer whales are specialists. They're bluefin tuna hunters. Their whole biology is tuned to a single high-value prey species that migrates through their corridor on a schedule the animals have been reading for generations. When you talk to people who fish those waters, and I mean the ones whose grandfathers fished the same water, the story of bluefin over the last few decades has not been a straight line. Populations collapsed. Management changed. Some recovery happened. Migration patterns shifted. What the animals encounter in a given season is not what their parents encountered. Here's the connection that matters. If the tuna hunt takes less time in a given season, or the schools come through in a different pattern, you end up with a group of highly intelligent predators sitting on the same piece of coastline with more idle hours than they used to have. And idle, intelligent animals invent things. The rudder game is not the cause of the story. It's the symptom of a group of animals with time on their fins and a new toy to explore. I want to pause here because I know how this sounds. It sounds like I'm letting them off the hook. Sinking a yacht is not a light thing. Crews have been genuinely frightened. Some of them have been in real danger, waiting for a tow on a disabled boat in open sea. I'm not minimizing that. And I'm saying the intent the headlines assigned was a human projection. The behavior is real. The damage is real. The animals doing it are real. The revenge is the part that never was. Now let me be honest about the skeptical side. Not every reported orca interaction in Iberian waters is one. Sailor forums have a well-documented habit of relabeling ordinary rudder post failures as strikes once the story is in the air. Some of the reports involve other species entirely, pilot whales, bottlenose dolphins, and in a couple of cases just heavy floating debris. Media framing turned a rare, geographically bounded behavior into what sounded like an ocean-wide epidemic. If you apply every one of those filters honestly, a lot of reports dissolve. That's fine. That's the filter working. What doesn't dissolve is a specific residue, a set of encounters with photo ID matches on named individuals from a known subpopulation, consistent damage patterns focused on rudders, consistent behavioral signature, and video documentation that any competent marine biologist can review. That residue is what the working group actually studies. That residue is the case, and it changes the question. It stops being are orcas attacking boats. It becomes why is this specific pod in this specific corridor teaching its juveniles to play with rudders during this specific window in their prey cycle? That's a different kind of question. It's not scary, it's not simple, but it's the honest one. Here's a small thing you can do if you want to test any of this yourself. Look up the Atlantic Orca Working Group directly. They publish tracking maps and interaction logs. Read the language they use. You will not find the word attack in the primary sources. You'll find interaction. You'll find approach. You'll find behavior. Now compare that language to the headline that first reached you. The gap between those two vocabularies is the media layer, and it is measurable. You don't need me to tell you it's there. You can see it yourself in about 10 minutes. That gap is worth thinking about beyond this one case. It's the same gap that shows up around wolf recoveries, cougar dispersals, and every other wildlife story where the scientists know one thing and the public reads another. The animals are not conspiring. The researchers are not hiding. The story is just getting flattened somewhere between the field notes and your feed. So when you see the next viral clip of a killer whale nudging a rudder, run it through a few questions. Is the physical evidence consistent with the pattern from the working group, or is this an isolated one-off? Is the witness in a position to identify the species and the individuals reliably? Is the behavior biologically plausible given what this population is known to do? Did the behavior start at a dateable moment, or has it always been there at low frequency? Has the language used by the researchers shifted, and in which direction? And after every honest filter, what part of the story actually survives? Those questions don't just work here. They work on every wildlife mystery you'll encounter. Move yourself off the binary of is it real or isn't it, and start asking which piece of the picture this specific case redraws. If you sail, or if you've had a marine encounter you've never really been able to explain, a whale watch moment that felt off, a dolphin behavior that looked deliberate, a story from the deck of a boat that got flattened into a headline, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. Somebody reading this is trying to make sense of the same thing you saw, and your account may be the piece that lands it for them. The animals are real. The corridor is real. The damage is real. The revenge was the projection. What the researchers are describing now is smaller, weirder, and more specific than the story you first heard. A small, critically endangered population, a changing food supply, a generation of juveniles inventing a game, and a group of adults letting them. That's not a horror story. It's not a redemption story either. It's just what these animals happen to be doing right now. If you want to see the same gap between the field record and the headline in a completely different species, I've got a video on humpback whales interfering with orca hunts and what the researchers think is actually going on there. That one will change what you think you know about intent in the ocean.